Hey everyone, Fran from the 5 Minute Modeler. Ever get in a rut with your model railroading? Lose interest, get bored, or otherwise dissatisfied? I have, and sometimes we just need a little boost to get us back on track. If you've been in a rut, today we're going to talk about some simple and easy projects that you can do in a short time that may get those juices flowing again. I'm talking about building some signs for your railroad right of way. Signs are a big part of any layout and help to set the time frame and the location of your layout. They also provide a little scenic detail with little expenditure in time or money. But all too often, they are forgotten or set aside for something to do later. Just like traffic signs on our highways, railroads use numerous signs along the right-of-way to alert train crews to various elements along the line. These include whistle posts, yard limits, mileage markers, and speed limit signs. I'll show you how I built these for my layout, as well as providing some brief information around each of the sign types. At the end of the video, I'll also show how to build a very important sign used by rail crews to protect them from other trains, so stick around till the end for that. These examples are from a variety of railroads. So if you are trying to achieve true prototypical details, then you'll want to do your own research. But even if you use a style that wasn't used on the prototype, very few will, if ever, notice. First, let's talk about whistle posts. These are signs that advise an engineer when the train is approaching a road crossing. This is the time when the engineer is close enough to begin blowing the horn per Federal Railroad Administration regulations. The normal signal for a road crossing in the U.S. is 2 longs, a short, and a long. The last long blast should be continued into the crossing. These are used at virtually all rail and road crossings except where prohibited or exempted by law. There are a bunch of different styles used by railroads. Some are very simple, some are a bit more complex. Here are the samples to get you going. These are samples without a lot of fanfare. Simple to create, these signs add one of those details people will see as they watch your trains. Now, like anything else, you could save yourself time by buying these types of signs from a manufacturer and pay $5 to $20 plus shipping, and many people will do that. But if you're like me, you take pride in building things yourself, and these are simple enough. Here are a few ways you can create these. First, the materials you'll need are simple. Some thin styrene strips or thick paper like index cards, some stiff wire for the poles, and for the lettering you can use dry transfer letters, water slide decals from an old set, or you can even print them on your computer. I'll be demonstrating the first 2 methods in this video. For whistle post, yard limit, and mileage markers, I am using black dry transfer letters, which you can buy at many arts and crafts stores or other large variety stores for a few dollars. What you get will likely last you a lifetime. In my case, I have these from years ago, so it's time to put them to use. You can knock out a bunch of these in about a half hour or so while watching television. I'm using a thin strip styrene piece for the backing, which happens to be about the right width for these signs, which are generally close to a foot wide or so. I lightly sand the styrene to give some tooth to it, then burnish the capital W onto the styrene with a dull pencil. I do this multiple times for each sign I want to make, moving down the piece of styrene for each. I also like the style used by at least one railroad where they showed the symbols for the signal for horns, 2 longs, 1 short, 1 long. This adds a bit different touch, so I made one of these. Mileage marker signs alert the engineer and crew to where they are in relation to the yard or their destination. For these, I wanted to stay somewhat prototypical, so I researched on the internet for an old timetable for my railroad. These timetables are a great source of information for understanding the types of trains and the time it took to reach each station. They also include the mileage markers for each station, and I use those numbers to identify various points on the layout where I will put these. Since we are modeling scale miles, the numbers won't reflect actual scale mileage, but will appear realistic nonetheless. To make these, I use a bit wider piece of styrene. I'm making the straightforward style with just the mileage number on it. I rub the various numbers on the styrene in a horizontal fashion, making multiple variations with my railroad schedule data. Yard limits specify areas on the main track where different rules apply to facilitate train and engine movements with heavy rail activity like switching cars. They reduce the need for constant dispatcher communication, requiring speeds of no more than 20 miles per hour. My layout includes several yard limit areas, such as in the North Grand Rapids run that manages car pickups and deliveries without a caboose. On tracks from my childhood, there was a yard limit sign 7 miles from the nearest yard, though I never saw yard activity there. You can define these areas on your layout as needed. To make these, I simply burnished the letters for yard limit onto the same piece of styrene I used for the mileage markers. I added 2 posts to support the sign. Speed limit signs are used to advise engineers, usually of a reduction in speed due to a steep grade, sharper than normal curve, or areas of poor trackage. Railroad speed limits in the U.S. are set by the Federal Railroad Administration, but depending on your time era may be different from today. Today, most mainline railroads have 60 mile per hour speed limits for freight trains and 80 mile per hour for passenger trains. These signs can be made with the same method as previously discussed. Some signs will use a white background and others may use a yellow background. For prototype accuracy, you'll need to do the research. These are great for a model railroad as they can help your operators slow down their trains. These would go well anywhere you have a sharp curve or other dangerous spot. Once I've completed the signs that I want, I give them a quick spray with some dull coat to seal the letters on the styrene and set them aside to dry. For the post, I use some stiff wire. I happen to use light gauge guitar strings that I've taken off of my guitar. These are great sources of steel wire for no cost. They also remain flexible, so if bumped on the layout, they won't bend but will spring back into place. I measure each piece to be about 15 scale feet in length, and I cut these with wire cutters. To paint the wires, I take the wire and I dip it into a near full bottle of slate gray craft paint, then place it into a block of foam to dry. The last sign I wanted to discuss is the blue warning flag. These are placed on, under, or between rolling stock and locomotives to prevent the moving of these while they are being worked on. When the blue flag is displayed, it prohibits coupling to the protected equipment, moving the equipment, or placing other cars on the track that would block or reduce the view of the blue flag. Only the person placing the flag can remove the flag, but won't remove it until he or she is sure that all personnel are clear. These have been used in the United States since the 1800s, so no matter what year you model, you can always use a few of these. You don't need to have them permanently built into your layout, and I'd suggest making only a few. Here's how I made mine. I started by painting a piece of styrene blue for the background. I used a paintbrush and some craft paint. You could also use spray cans or an airbrush. Once the paint dried, I lightly sanded it with fine sandpaper. For this, I used waterside decals that I had since the lettering was going to be white. I had a sheet of decals that just had letters and numbers. I was able to cut the ST letters together since they were next to each other, as well as the OP letters in the alphabet. I used the bottom of a takeout condiment cup and place a bit of water in it. This is the right size as it isn't too deep and makes it easier to retrieve the decals after they've soaked. These decals were pretty old, probably 20 years or so. When I went to apply them, they basically fell apart. To remedy this, I used this product, Micro Super Film, made by Microscale, which is basically its own decal film, and brushed on a thin coat across the sheet. Once dried, I cut out the letters and placed them in the water to soak. After 30 seconds or so, I removed the decal piece, moved it to the sign, then slid the decal into the sign area. After adding the ST piece, I added the OP piece into the same manner. After aligning and adjusting the decals, I used a dry paintbrush to wick up the remaining water. I then added a bit of microsol decal solvent to help the decal settle onto the styrene. Once this dried, I gave it a quick spray of dull coat. To make the standard post for this, I take a piece of wire and bend it using needle nose pliers to a 45-degree angle. I then eyeball it on the track to where the center of the sign will be, and then bend it at that point to another 45-degree angle, like this. To adhere the styrene to the wire, I scrape a bit of the paint off where the sign will go. I use just a touch of CA glue. If you're using paper or wood materials, you could use a PVA glue. If you're using foam for your scenery subbase, you can simply push the flag into the ground alongside your rail behind a car or locomotive to alert others. Otherwise, drill a small hole and insert it. Well, that's it for this episode. These are simple projects you can do sitting in front of the television and certainly won't take much time. My explanations may be a bit brief and incomplete, so if you have knowledge of the use of these or any other signs, throw it in the comments to help your fellow modelers. And thanks again for watching another episode of the 5-Minute Modeler.